Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Historic Preservation Commission of the March 28, 2011. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Shire.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan.
Here.
Commissioner Tufankan.
Here.
Commissioner Vidor.
Here.
And Chairperson Mardian.
Here. Report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda of the meeting was posted on or before Tuesday, March 22, 2011, on the bulletin board of outside City Hall. Agenda item 3, approval of minutes of February 28, 2011. Any comments,
Just
corrections?
I had one question on page 3. The bullet points on the top, potential painting on the exterior in the arch area. Was that we had potential, I'm just not sure it's clear what we're saying there.
When I went through the recommendations, considerations, it wasn't clear.
Okay.
Anyone else? Nope. Good. Need a motion to approve? Yeah, absolutely. No spelling, no spelling. Okay, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes of...
That was me.
Hi, Sabrina. She
Okay.
hung up.
need
A motion to approve the minutes as they stand.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Morgan.
Yes.
Commissioner Shire.
Yes.
Commissioner Tufankan.
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor.
Yes.
And Chairperson Mardian.
Here. Okay, moving on. Oral communication discussion is limited to items not a part of the agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or any decision made. I don't see anybody on oral communication unless somebody hasn't turned a card in. And I'll close the oral communication. I just, before I get, never mind, I'll go back. Comments from commissioners? Any comments?
No.
Thank you. We'll move on. All right. This is a historic day, you're right?
That's right.
Okay. I'm going to switch a little bit on the agenda to, if you don't mind. I'm going to take up agenda item 7B first, because I think that's a quick matter. Then I'll go to A, and we'll move back to our regular agenda.
Very
we do
good.
that?
Very good.
Okay.
I'll
Or you want
introduce...
Because B is rather quick.
Yeah, no, it
Okay.
should be quick, yeah.
Okay.
So item 7D, if you remember 3 months ago, we approved the Brockmont Park neighborhood that's proposing a historic district in the area to move forward with the petition requesting the historic resource survey. And this is a case where they didn't get the petitions to us in time to make it for the 3-month deadline of this meeting, but that's in no way any indication of the lack of interest in the neighborhood. It was just a small group trying to pull the signatures together, and we have representatives from the neighborhood here to discuss that. Your task today is to, if you choose, approve an extension. The ordinance allows a 3-month extension for this first petition. And we have enough signatures in hand right now, which haven't been verified, but assuming they all come out as verified, they've already more than met the minimum criteria. So we'll put them on the agenda for next month for the formal hearing.
Okay. Good. Anybody has any questions or
And
time limit?
yeah, and
3 months?
we have speakers for this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're right. Sorry. Rebecca Maxwell?
To request the extension for the next meeting. So if that's been approved, that was really our only business today, because we do have more than enough signatures already.
Thank you. Any
Okay.
questions? Or
Yeah. So if they already have more signatures, what is it that we're missing that does not allow us to agendize the item
The
today?
deadline actually expired before this meeting.
Oh,
So we would
okay.
have had to have that. Plus, I have to verify the
Mine.
signatures to make sure we have from all the owners of a property
Okay.
instead of single
Okay.
owners.
Got it.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we just need a motion to extend?
exactly.
Okay. Anybody wants to make the motion?
Okay, I'll make a motion to extend the deadline until the next HPC meeting.
Not the next HPC,
Whoops.
3 months, correct?
No, well, it's an extension for 3 months, most likely.
It'll
they'll
go
be back
next time.
month.
Okay, I make a motion to extend their deadline for 3 months.
I second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Tefankian?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Mardian?
Yes. Thank you. We'll go back to 7A, the Brand Library and Arts Center renovation. Commission review of design development proposal.
I just wanted to, before we introduce the project team, who don't need us or don't need me to help them tell the story of the project, I just want to remind the Commission where we are in the process. This has been brought through the schematic design phase, and it's now entering the design development phase. There have been community meetings. The Planning Commission has heard this item and didn't have any issues with it. At the community meeting, there were no issues raised about historic preservation issues, that component of the project. What the Commission won't see today are actual drawings showing what this is going to look like. That's the next phase of the architecture team's work to kind of come up with a design that's going to work to kind of respect the history of the Brand building, or of the El Miradero building, as well as the Art Center and library, or the 1969 edition.
Okay.
So without anything else, I have Cindy Cleary is here, Director of Libraries, to introduce the project.
Thank you, Jay. Good afternoon, commissioners and fellow staff and members of the public. I have to say I'm delighted to be here. I've been involved with the library for 30 years and spent 10 years at Brand Library, so it is an historic moment in terms of my life. So thank you for being here and listening to this. As you know, the Art Center includes an art library, which is housed in the 1904 Brand Mansion, and a music library, a recital hall, an art gallery, and studios located in the 1969 edition. All components of the center are managed by the library, except for the art studios, which is managed by the Community Services and Parks Department. As Jay mentioned, we've completed the schematic design phase and are now in design development. And this capital improvement project is inclusive of restoration and rehabilitation of targeted elements of the historic 1904 mansion so that we can better showcase this very important signature of our history, of Glendale's history. The project also encompasses mechanical and structural upgrades that include a significant seismic upgrade to ensure the longevity of the building, as well as space utilization improvements, ADA improvements, well-needed ADA improvements, and some landscaping improvements. The project is led by Gruen Associates in partnership with Offenhauser Meikle Architects. The library and the Public Works Department are jointly managing the project in collaboration with the Community Development and the Community Services and Parks Department. In February, as Jay mentioned, we presented a preliminary idea to the community, and it was well received. We've also made a presentation to the Parks Commission. After this, we expect to go to the Arts and Culture Commission, and we'll go to City Council for final approval to move forward. We also expect, once design development is completed, to come back to you for further review. For those of you who are listening and members of the public, if you are interested in seeing the presentation that we did for the community in February, or in giving us any input, please go to www.brandlibrary.org and click on Renovation Update. Once again, www.brandlibrary.org. And we welcome input from anyone in the community. At this point, I'd like to introduce Deborah Gerard from Gruen Associates to give you a more detailed study.
Deborah, I've got this clicker right there.
The clicker. All right. So let's see if.
Oh, let me click ahead for you.
All right.
Forgot that we were. There we go.
All right, that looks a little more familiar. Well, hello, my name is Deborah Gerard. I'm a partner at Gruen Associates, and we are the lead architect on this project. And so I wanted to thank you for your time today, to the commissioners, to the staff, and to the community. There we go. I won't go through this whole list, but just to let you know that we've got a full complement of consultants working with us, together with us on this project, along with the city, the library, and the Public Works Department. The person that I will draw attention to, I should draw attention to Leslie Young, who's my project manager, who's joined me here. But my partner in this, which is Fran Offenhauser from Offenhauser McKeel, who is our historic preservation specialist and a fellow architect. And so she will be making a bulk of the presentation today. So I was just going to set the stage for her a little bit here. So this is our agenda for the day. We're going to give you a brief overview of the goals of the project, talk a little bit about the history of the building, how it came to be used the way it is, some of the organizational issues within the library and how we're addressing them, and the relevance should hopefully be clear as to the impact on preservation. And we'll talk in greater detail about what makes this an important building, what's important about the preservation, what we can do. And then we want to talk a little bit about a few other things, landscape and how that has an impact on preservation, as well as some of the other things we're doing to as a part of this project to help preserve this really wonderful resource for the city of Glendale. And I'll close up with talking a little bit about cost and schedule so that you have kind of a full overview of the project. So starting out with the scope of the project and what our goals are. Preservation is at the top of our list because we think that's really important. And basically everything that we're doing has the overtone of looking at it from a standpoint of preservation. Even when we get into some of the things such as wayfinding and modernization of the systems, those are all in the spirit of really trying to preserve this great resource and make sure that it can stay as a great resource and be useful to the city. And so there are aspects other than preservation that are important for us to spend money on in the context of this. Cindy mentioned accessibility. That is important as a public facility to make sure that we can accommodate all persons visiting this facility. So with that, let me turn it over to Fran. She's going to take you through the preservation and aspects of the building, and I'll come back in towards the end here and talk about some of the landscape and some of the other issues. So Fran, take it away.
Thank you. It's really a privilege to be here today and a privilege to be able to work on Brand Library. And hopefully, if this is getting too long for your normal presentations, don't hesitate to say, shorten it.
Not I.
Is this what I do to advance? Okay. So I believe you're all familiar with Brand Mansion, the home of Leslie Brand. It was listed in your register in 1977, but it was listed as a complete site, both Brand Mansion and the 1969 building. It was deemed in 2000 to be, you commissioned a historic structures report, and it was deemed eligible for listing in the National Register in the year 2000. So the origins of the house are in the 1904 construction. The architect was Nathaniel Dryden, also responsible for the Robinson Home and Gardens in Beverly Hills.
Right.
And let's see if I do it right.
Far right side.
Thank you. And it initially was built as a one-story home, and the expansion in 1910 was to add a second-floor master bedroom. In 1956, the Brand home came in, it was donated to the city of Glendale and was converted to a library. And the library was so successful that in 1969, its programs, both library programs and art exhibits and music events, needed to expand. And so the compatible 1969 edition was built. And so the Brand Mansion you recognize in the ochre and the purple is the main level of the 1969 edition. inside the building, but am I saying things you all know?
Sure.
Okay, I'll try to go faster. Inside the building, the uses in the light purple are the library's uses. In addition, the ochre above is the Recital Hall in the 1969 building, and the bright yellow are is the Skylight Gallery, art gallery, and the deeper purple also is used for art exhibits, the hallways in the 1969 building. The lighter green indicates Brand Studios. It's actually at a lower level of the building. It's operated by your Parks Department, and it is not a part of our project. Some of the things that we're working on are going to affect it necessarily, but it's not a focus of the project. And we started from looking at the characteristics of the scale of the rooms in both the original mansion and in the 1969 edition. And this illustrates what's fairly obvious, that the home was a home. The rooms are smaller scale. They're appropriate for living, and the larger scale rooms were added to add a component to the library where larger scale spaces were needed, and to the art center. So what had happened over time, from the time that the library moved into the building in 1956, and then it was so successful that the programs, the collections, everything grew, was that the growth didn't necessarily happen so that the uses ended up in necessarily the most appropriate places. So what you can see in this diagram is that the collection, the library's collection, ends up being spread throughout the library's area. The books ring the rooms, the various rooms in the library, but that's not necessarily the best way for the public to access the collections of the library. And the people ended up getting sort of distributed amongst the various areas, as opposed to having it necessarily have a conscious growth to it. In 1956, the central atrium, or solarium, had been a lecture, meeting hall, concert area, but over time, things just happened. So we have come in to try to not only bring back the building in terms of physically and aesthetically what you see, but the spirit of it, and to help both the library's functioning and the historic building be more understandable and make more sense. So our proposed reorganization of the library spaces does a number of things. It brings the more people-oriented uses, the purple uses, into the old public rooms of the home. Makes sense. You sat and read a book in your living room, sit and read a book in that part of the library. It takes the book stacks in the collection and consolidates them in the 1969 building so that the library will be able to have its collection literally A to Z. I know that's not how they do it. I think it's Dewey Decimal System, but literally have a comprehensible order to the library's collection. At the heart of the building, and we'll talk more about this, is the old solarium, and at the heart of the building we have located where the red C is in the yellow part at the center of the home. The reference librarians today, those people are the heart of the library, and they should be findable at the center of the library. The light green in this diagram are the offices of the librarians, and again, they've ended up far away from the heart of the library, and they need to be accessible to the patrons. Is this making sense?
Yes, very. Yes.
So I think the one thing you're going to see in this diagram that is a change from today's way the library is used. Currently, library patrons come to the front door of the mansion. It's at the bottom of the drawing, the double doors, the south main doors that were the doors of the home. So during the day, library patrons come to the front door of the home. At night, the patrons coming to the recital hall or the gallery come. Oh, who's doing that? Terrific, thank you. Come to a completely different set of doors and come to events in the 1969 building. And that's led to some confusion amongst patrons, and it's also led to a pulling apart of the wonderfulness of this library, because it's not only a library, it's not only a place where there are books about art, it's a place where there are exhibits in the galleries about art, and it's not only a place where there are recordings of music, but there's lectures about music, live music, and those two have become separated, and there's a synergy that's being missed. So there is a proposal. Anna?
Fran, you have the center button if you want to do it yourself on your...
You know what, I'm going to rely, I can't do two things, dumb and pat my head. So Deborah, if you give us... So we are proposing that the entrance of the library be at the joint between the two. That the space that's currently, there's not much there, but that the entrance be where the two parts of the library join, and that's much closer to the gallery and the recital hall. And even at night, people could come through there to bring the entrances of the two functions of the facility closer together. So that's working.
Yes,
Okay.
very good. Keep going.
Okay, so now we get to the fun part. And as Deborah said, everything that's going on in this project, preservation isn't just the repainting of a ceiling or the restaining of wood. Giving this building extended useful life. It's not a house anymore. It's not a museum. But giving it extended useful life, even if you put in new air conditioners, that's preservation. That's allowing this building to remain useful and appreciated by the public. But what we're trying to do, in addition, is bring back some of the sense of the brand era to the building. So I want to walk you through this, and I want to point out that the two things. The period of significance historically for this building is deemed to be 1903 to 1925, and that was the era, Brand's era himself. And that leads you to certain decisions and understandings. I also want to point out that this building is a far more radical design than I think it's ever been given credit for. I think many people walk up to the outside and see the white exuberance of the Indo-Saracenic design, the towers, the veranda, the multifoil arches, and you don't have much to relate it to, but it's pretty noticeable, and it's quite a landmark for Glendale. And there's the sense that you walk in, you pass through the doors, and where did it go? Where did Brand go? And where did this epoch-making landmark go? And I think part of what's been missed is that this building was epoch-making on the interior as well. The organization around a patio is really the progenitor of the California patio home. And this predates by 10 years anyone else doing it. I've found some literature, I don't know whether to trust it, that it actually was an open-roofed courtyard. No, and that was prior to being glass-roofed. This is an open-roofed patio home. It's essentially designed around a mosque with a fountain in the courtyard, and this is radical. Having the servants down on the first floor, on the same floor with the master bedroom, this was a radical home on the inside as well as the outside. And even the decorating was out of step with some of the Victoriana of the time. So, And we can talk more about that if you want to. Let me keep going. So, oops, did I miss one? Okay. So we'll want to point out that we made a decision to look at 3 different levels of restoration, and that's mostly in deference to the budget, but also levels of importance. So the lower 3, the library, the reception hall, and the parlor, the main public rooms of the home, are the rooms that we would like to see restored to the brand era. And we'll go into that in a little more detail. We're not going to put horsehair sofas and such back. It's still going to be a library, but architecturally it really can pretty much go back to the original. In the solarium and the dining room, of course, they will still be rehabilitated to the Secretary of the Interior standards. And even in the areas that are shown in white, which were the bedrooms and the kitchen of the home, all of the character-defining features will still be retained. There's no modernization, so to speak, but they're not going to receive the same level of restoration as the rest of the house. So I start out with the solarium, because this really was the heart of the home, and this is what made it so radical. And as you can see now, it's really hard to feel that centrality. If you go to the library, you're kind of wending your way through and having a bit of difficulty figuring out which way is where. It still happens to me, I have to be honest, and it's because the orientation has been lost. This was a light-filled center to the house. It had a concrete floor. Light flowed into it, the light flowed back into the house, and that's been cut off. So our goal is really to return it to that feel of the central heart of the house, and that's why we put the reference librarians in it. And as you can see, it had exterior plaster on the walls. It was treated, the walls of the room were treated like outdoor walls. It will still retain, however, a roof over it. We're not quite ready to go back to either a skylight or an open patio. And sorry, here's an example of, on the right-hand side, you can see in 1956, we have a number of photos. A lot of our documentation comes from photos they took as they were demolishing and rehabilitating, and we're able, in part, to put it back because somebody took those photos there. So we can see it being pulled apart. So, as an example, behind the gentleman with the white hat is the window that went into the reception hall, and we can see what it looked like. And now go back to putting it back. Another area that we intend to restore according to the Secretary of Interior standards, but not the highest level of restoration, is the dining room, which, as you can see, in 1956 was converted to the main reading room of the library. And as I can show you 2 examples here. You see that on either side of the big picture window is some wainscoting that was added in 1956. We take it away. You see there's heavy draperies on the window. We take them away. Interestingly enough, there's a tremendous amount of the historic fabric is still there. It's pretty minor interventions to get it to come back. And this shows on the right-hand photograph, if you look currently, there used to be 2 openings into the solarium from the dining room. Now that's a big wide opening, if you're familiar with the library. And we will leave it the way it is today. So now we go to there are 3 areas that are the priorities for restoration. And I think when you look at this photo, it helps you see how we're reversing some of, and I hate to say it, but I call it the blanding that happened in 1956. Part of the reason you lose your orientation, you don't quite know where you are, is in your own home, you can tell which is the living room, the dining room, the den, and they're just aesthetically treated differently. But the effort in turning this into a library was to sort of blend it all together, and you've lost the sense the sort of the majesty of the reception hall. The coloration, you can see the coloration of the walls is now white. Lost the decoration on the ceiling, changed the light fixture. So the intent is that this is one of the priority areas for restoration, and you walk in and it's going to feel like a reception hall. And here you can see in 1956 they still kept the dark color on the wall, but subsequently it went away too. So there's a sense of focalness to this reception hall that got lost, and we're going to bring it back. Another priority area for restoration is the living room. It was also called the music room, and two of its windows were removed in 1956. You can see in the photograph, the black and white photograph, that there were windows facing west that have been removed. They'll be reinstated. And our furnishings will be more like living room furnishings, but not Victorian-era furnishings. And hopefully this room can be used for reading, listening, looking at oversized books, etc. Things you would do in your living room with a reading lamp. I'll keep going. So I think the last priority area for restoration is the room that's to the right of the entrance, and that is the parlor. And this is probably the one that's going to go through the largest change, because it was remodeled by the brands themselves, and they put the dark wallpaper in. But our goal is to really take it back to the earlier time, and you can see that it was a quite light and bright room, and light curtains, the beautiful decorative work on the ceiling, and our intention is to take it back to the era of its first incarnation as opposed to its later remodeling. And one photo here, again, it got wainscoting, it got heavy valances, heavy draperies, heavy wallpaper, and the intention is to reverse that and go back to the earlier era. So I think that describes what's going on the inside, and Deborah's going to talk about the eras of landscaping on the outside, and what we're doing to support the home.
Thank you, Fran. So here you see a photo of the front of the building. It says mid-1900s. It's actually closer to the beginning of the 1900s when that photo was taken. And you can see that the building facade is very visible. The landscape supports it but doesn't overtake it. And the photo on the right is a present-day image where the building is fairly well masked by trees. Trees are often a good thing. In this case, we think that they're not really supporting the building, and they're blocking a very important view of this very important building. And so as we have discussed with the Parks Commission, this is unusual for us. We're architects and landscape architects both. It's very unusual for us to come in and say we think we should take down trees, but we think that it's the right thing to do, that like a building needs restoration, the landscape needs restoration as well. And that helps not only it, but also the building and the rest of the complex. So we are proposing to remove a certain number of trees. These trees here are the ones that you saw in that photo that are blocking the view of the building. They weren't part of the original fabric, and they're not really supporting the building. They're not providing necessary shade. We think that it's appropriate for them to be removed. There happens to be a dead tree right here, which there's not much controversy about removing a dead tree. That's not currently blocking a lot of view, but if it was restored as a tree with full foliage, it would also be part of this problem of blocking the view of the house. We've spent a lot of time talking about the mansion. We haven't spent as much time talking about the rest of the complex. We are trying to treat this as an entire complex and not just two buildings. And so there are some things that we want to do relative to the 1969 addition that fall into the same vein of trying to support view of the building. It's a different era building, but we think it's still important for there to be the appropriate visibility of that and the appropriate functioning of the spaces. And so we are proposing to remove and replace. There are a couple ficus trees that are just very large. We'll replace them with a more appropriately scaled tree that doesn't have quite the root problem that a ficus does. There's a really wonderful little courtyard inside the 1969 building that right now is overtaken by a tree. It was a great idea when it started to have a tree in the middle of this courtyard, but the tree has just grown too quickly and it's too large for the space and really prevents that space from being used for other functions. And so as part of our landscape plan, we are proposing to remove that tree as well. And Fran mentioned this plaza, but I'll just talk about it in a little greater detail. So right now you come up a staircase. There's a tiny little stair to get you up onto the porch, walk around and into the building if you're going into the library. Or you come up the staircase and go up another series of stairs up into the gallery and the recital hall area. So we are proposing that you come up to a central point here. We're removing the little staircase up to the mansion so that we visually do not attract people to go the wrong way. And we will have a new ramp and rather large, gracious staircase up onto an upper plaza, accompany it with some wayfinding signage to enhance knowledge of how to function in this building. But it's interesting, for all of the research we've done, people are always going to the wrong door. So people trying to go to the library are always headed this way. Right. So encouraging people to go that way and designing the plaza so that people go that way, we think will be the appropriate move. And then we have this unified plaza that Fran mentioned, a door into the library, a door into the art gallery and recital hall. So we're calling this our unified entry. Disabled access parking is in the back of the building and comes in through this common connector. We didn't talk about that in great detail, and we don't have a lot of images to show you at this moment, but we probably should have shown you a picture of the current connector between these two buildings, which is really not as well executed as it could have been. And it's certainly understated, and to turn this into the entry point for the building, we have proposed to the library, and they were very receptive to this, to increase the connector, so widen the connector so that right now it's a corridor between two buildings, and we want to actually make it a room, an entry gallery. And so that connector, which is currently about that size, will now become significantly larger, about 3 times its current size. We'll have glass on both ends so that either from the disabled access parking or from the front stair terrace, it has a similar appearance, glassy and inviting. It will glow at night and be the entry hub for this building. All right, let me move on. Some other features, I've probably talked about most of them, so I won't go through them again. Other than to point out a few that I probably didn't mention. We will be rebuilding the steps up to the plaza, both because they really could use it, and also we see an opportunity to design it so that there's some bench seating along the way so that you're viewing the landscape and the mansion from a seated position and really make this a part of the park. And in front of the mansion, there's currently a conglomeration of planting materials that are not supporting the design of the mansion, and we will be replacing it with things that we consider to be more era appropriate, and certainly a symmetrical design on both sides of the front entry. The front entry will still be a usable entry. It will be a part of the exiting from the building. But also on for special events, it will still be available to be used as an entry. Certainly this area will be available for sitting and viewing and taking photographs and all of the other things that come along with this building. So that was most of the kind of fun and interesting aspects of it. I want to talk about a few things that don't show as well in pictures. We are making some seismic improvements to the building, both buildings. On the 1969 edition, we need to go back into the precast panels that are on the exterior cladding and reinforce the connections. So that's a fairly tactical maneuver. We open up the connection, we do some new welding, we close it back up again. There's not an exterior or an interior lasting view of that. It's all hidden. On the mansion, it's we're still in investigation and doing some testing to really confirm exactly how to do the work. But the work that we know we need to do involves some of those plates that no one likes to see, and we're not going to leave you with them on the outside of the building. That help us to tie back the masonry walls to the diaphragms. But we will be able to plaster over them, embed them in the plaster, and then plaster over them so that they're not visible. So that when we're done, we expect this building to look fundamentally the way it does, except improved, from an exterior standpoint. And so that is all moving along very nicely. Mechanically, we are in need of updating the mechanical systems in both buildings. Both buildings are kind of interwoven with each other and from a mechanical and electrical standpoint, and so the air conditioning systems that we replace need to be replaced in both buildings. And that is more like deferred maintenance than it is like a modernization, to be quite frank about it. We will retain as much of the existing ductwork as possible in the mansion so that we're retaining the fabric of the building to the extent that we can, and that's fundamentally something that we can accomplish. It's the air conditioning units that need to be replaced. Electrically, we'll do upgrades to allow this building to function more as a library in a current day technology. We have a lot more things to plug in, a lot more things that need power, and so we need to provide power so that people can utilize the building in the appropriate manner. The life safety upgrades are relatively modest. It mostly has to do with sprinkler heads that are in their existing location that we expect them to be, but we need to re-roof the building, and there's sprinkler pipe on top of the building, so there will be some adjustments to that fire sprinkler system in order to allow us to re-roof the building. Again, from a visual standpoint, we don't expect there to be anything new that isn't imposition on the building. In fact, we think everything that we're doing, we're finding kind of discrete ways to allow it to be less visible than it is today. And I mentioned the maintenance of re-roofing and repainting. So that brings us to a brief discussion of cost. It's a fairly modest budget for all that we're trying to accomplish, $7.4 million, which includes everything. The cost of moving the library out of the building into some sort of temporary quarters while the construction takes place, all the maintenance, all the work that we've discussed. And so while we would love to be able to do everything we want to do from a preservation standpoint, reality tells us that we have to really keep that in balance. And so what you see here is the balance of about how that budget is breaking down for us right now. And certainly every bit of funds that isn't needed in another category adds back into the preservation work that we're doing. From a schedule standpoint, we'd like to be complete with design by the end of this year, bid the project out at the end of this year, and be in construction starting next year. And because of the nature of some of the work that has to take place, because there are some hazardous materials involved in the mansion and to a lesser extent in the 1969 building, we have recommended that the building be vacated during construction. That's the best way to protect building occupants and also to shorten the construction duration so that we can get the work done as quickly and cost-effectively as possible and get the building back in action as quickly as possible. And with that, we conclude our presentation. Thank you. We've been going on for a while here, so I apologize for taking so much of your time, but certainly want to address any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for coming. Any questions?
Well, I have a question about the collection itself.
Yes.
I don't know if that should be Ms. Cleary or not. Is basically the library will be dark during this period of time, or will the collections be moved to some other area, or?
Good question. We're in the process of looking for a temporary location. No matter what we do, it won't be the full collection that we move, so we'll move the most used part of it. I mean, the CD collection, probably some of the architecture books. Possibly, we're looking for a location that we can have at least a mini gallery presence.
Yeah.
So, but that hasn't been determined.
And I have a question about the front door that will no longer be the front door. Is that going to be open just during special presentations, or the way it looks now that the librarians are in the center section and the door itself, will it always be open? Not that I don't trust, having worked for the Glendale Public Library for many, many years, things tend to disappear. So I was just curious, will the door always be open, or is it a...
We have the option to keep it open, and we really haven't determined exactly what we do, but we're leaning towards leaving it locked during open hours.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Since you started, I'll come this way.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to commend you on the great job that the project team has done. I think it was very thorough. I really appreciated the programming effort, spent time in taking cues from the facility as to what the rooms should be and how they should function, from restoration to the systems. I thought it was very, very thorough. I think the building will be better for it. The occupants it'll be better space for them, much more user-friendly, and I think it really makes much better sense of the facility that you have to work with. I had just one, or maybe two quick questions. The brand studios, I know you're not touching that in the renovation. Is that being vacated as well during the construction?
Yes, and let me just address that. Because the building is so interwoven, while we're not renovating that space, it is affected by the renovation. So it benefits from the fact that we have to upgrade the air conditioning system. So we'll get an upgraded air conditioning system just by being there. But the precast panels that are around the outside of that building, while they're above the brand studios, are on the level above, we still have to get access to the connections, and so there will be a minor impact to the brand studios as a result of doing that. And so, and then lastly, the electrical and fire sprinkler systems are also interwoven. So for all of those reasons, we felt that it was not appropriate for that to be occupied, that it would be a public safety issue. And so similar to Brand Library Collection, the library is working with the Parks Department to find alternate locations for the Brand Studios to conduct their business.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Redor.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Commissioner Shire's comment. I've been going to the Brand Library for a while and waiting for this project to happen. So having you here and seeing that it's left the barn, so to speak, is really, really exciting. Sorry it's not a $20 million project as it originally was, but it's great to see a restoration being done and the library itself being rethought. I just have a couple questions. If there was more money, would you be doing the skylight? It was a little disappointing to see that the skylight wasn't going to be brought back, but that's just a comment. I don't expect you to say, oh, okay, we'll bring back the skylight, but okay.
The architects have given us different options that if we were to find additional funding, we could do. Whether it would be the skylight or not, I don't know, but certainly something that we've looked at.
Okay, thanks. And just a couple more. I know that most of all the photos are in black and white. Obviously, is there any way to understand the historic coloring of the house and to replicate that, or are you just going to pick the best options, which is also another way to do it? Certainly, to generally pick historic colors.
There's usually a
pretty easy way to find it, and you just sandpaper down through the layers till you get to it. So the full intention is to do that. I've worked on some other buildings of this era where I actually did it very, very accurately, and they were very dark. So there may be a little license, but we're definitely going to find them, and then in each room also will get a particular character from its color. So we're going to do that research, and the study has been done, and the decorative paintings in the ceilings are still there. They are. They were covered over with a wire mesh, so that a decorative painter actually brought a decorative painter in to look, and they could be completely repainted, and we put that in the budget for the 3 principal rooms.
It's great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just a couple things. And, well, I have so many comments and questions, I probably should just defer things. Oh, there was one other thing. There's this little piece of mosaic on the front patio that everybody talks about. What is that? Yeah, it's just a little, looks like something from a Roman ruin or something. Is that anything? And is that, what is that?
Well, there's a letter B on it. The B, there's a B there.
Yeah.
This is one of those urban myths.
Yes,
The
urban legend, right.
Yeah, the urban legend that I've heard is that it was recovered from the Palo Alto earthquake at Stanford.
Oh.
Mr. Brand saw it,
I see.
liked it, and brought it down and embedded it in his...
Oh, so it's historic. Okay.
So now we
I think the point is that there's not a mosaic floor there. which
Yeah.
So that's,
people think
that was
just a
curious
remnant, so-
myself. Okay.
Yeah, okay. There was something about a concern about obscuring the fourth facade of the mansion. I read that in the report. Is the fourth facade of the mansion the back of the...
In the staff report?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't say fourth facade. Maybe rear facade?
Maybe it was
I
the
don't know, maybe I
architect's
did.
report.
It was 4th.
Well, well, if it is part of the project.
The concern is just obscuring the facade, period.
Oh, okay.
And with...
I just wondered what that
overgrown
was.
Landscaping, so...
Okay. Let's see. Conversion of 2 historic windows between the foyer and the solarium into doorways was discussed, and I just wondered, I should have written down what page that was on, and I did not. And I just wondered what, if anything, and there was a comment about there was going to be minimal loss, and I just wondered what was going to be lost and what the implications of converting these historic windows would be.
It's right there. I think you missed it. Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
Here's your plan. I was just trying to find a reverse of a loss.
Okay. Bringing something back.
It used to be that when you came into the reception hall, light poured into the reception hall from the solarium. And in the 1956 remodeling, the windows were blocked out. There were windows here on either side of the fireplace that brought light into the front hall. When you now walked into the building, that light from the solarium doesn't come in.
Right.
However, the proposal is, rather than to bring them back as windows, to bring them back as a doorway. It would still have
okay.
a decorative part.
All right. I wasn't sure what area of the connection you were talking about.
So
Now I see
There
it.
was a window on either side here. Currently, it's gone. It's 2 portraits. And I'd like to bring it
Okay.
back, but bring it back as doorway so people actually can...
Right,
can
right,
float in.
right. Okay.
So that's just on the plan, see,
It's right,
face here,
It's right
right
there.
there.
on either side of...
Okay.
Okay.
And we'll be restoring this to what it once looked like.
One more thing, Ken?
Go ahead.
All right. No, I don't want to.
If it's a question, go ahead. Answer.
Oh, okay.
It's
I have a question
period.
about the basement of the brand, because that is an area in which a tremendous amount of things are being stored, and, maybe too much is being stored, and maybe it should be rethought about how it's used, but is anything going to be impacted there in the...
Very, very, very little. The basement's actually in the 1969 edition.
Oh, right, yes.
And we are, for in order to conserve our dollars and do the most good with it, we're trying to do the least that we need to in that space.
Okay.
So we will need to get into that space to do some strengthening of the floor above so that the library stacks are appropriately supported. And luckily, we can do that relatively easily.
Okay.
And over time, we think that could have a better purpose, but it's not part of this project at the moment.
And one more thing, and then I will shut up, I promise.
Please.
Mechanical equipment on the roof is something I read somewhere, and, I thought about the library on, on Glenwood and the big brouhaha about these giant HVAC things. What is that all about?
Yeah, this has also gone back and forth a few times. We jumped at the chance to get the mechanical equipment off the roof, but sadly we've kind of had to put it back on. And that has strictly to do with economics and trying to find the most cost-effective way to provide air conditioning to the building so that we can preserve money to do some of the other things that are important. I should probably mention, tied to mechanical equipment, one change that we are making in the basement of the 1969 addition is there's a wall separating two halves of the mechanical room that's down there. We're going to remove that wall so we can put in a better piece of mechanical equipment that's larger, that can be more efficient and effective. But sadly, we will still need to have some units up on the roof. They are delicately placed on the roof. That is correct. We just wish to get them off altogether, and we couldn't do that.
Can't be done, huh? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Wheeler. That was one of my questions.
Oh. All right.
Commissioner Tefangit?
Well, I have been going to the Brand libraries and the galleries for many, many years, and I've been hearing talk about renovation and restoration. I'm really glad to see that it's finally happening, and I really commend you on your hard work and the research. It was very thorough. And it seems like the library would have a better flow, and I really like to see the Plaza dual entry for the gallery space in the library. I think that makes a lot of sense. I was just wondering about the gallery space. Is there going to be any changes in the gallery space and the recital hall? And where would the gallery be in the temporary space?
I'll let Cindy talk to the last part of your question. In terms of the first two parts, very little change will be noticeable in galleries or in the recital hall. It is our intention to keep that as the spaces work really well right now, and they didn't seem to really be needing a lot of attention. There will be some limited things that get done to them to improve the efficiency of the lighting and replace the carpeting, but it's really small tactical maneuvers. As far as where the recital hall goes?
If we are able to maintain the gallery, it will depend on the space that we find, and we're not close to, or I shouldn't say that, we're still exploring different options for a temporary space. So if it's a small space, we'll probably focus on the library. If it's a bigger space that can accommodate a gallery, I want to bring some component of a gallery in, but it's too soon to tell.
And are there any exhibits booked during that time, or not yet?
Yeah, we booked through the end of this year in anticipation of this. We're kind of going month by month, though.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Fangin? No? I actually had a few, but a couple of them have been answered already. There's some stairs. Are they going to the basement? I see it in two different plans. They've been eliminated, even in the newer portion of the new addition.
Yeah, there are actually two, very perceptive, actually. We did slip that in on you. There are two small staircases that are being removed because they're just no longer needed. Oopsie, that's the wrong thing. There's a stair
Right there, yeah.
right around here that goes to a water heater closet in the basement.
Okay.
And it's a very, very small basement, probably about 6 square feet, if that. And we've got a better location for the water heater, and we felt that that space was better used as part of the entry, so we are eliminating that stair. There is another stair that, let's see if I can, there we go. There is another staircase
Right there,
that's
yes.
right here that is not used for any sort of exiting purpose, and it's not really used for a functional purpose because the two halves of the building, the two levels of the building operate so separately. And again, we felt like we could use that square footage for a higher, better purpose, and so we've eliminated that stair as well.
Okay.
Very perceptive. Did not mean to slip that past you, though.
I'm sorry. I have good eyes. I'm sorry. God gave me good eyes. Now, I'll go back to the construction time. The reason I'm saying you're getting the permit or your entitlements by the end of the year,
That's correct.
and that includes coming back to us. Are we seeing this project again? And
Yes.
you have to go to city council?
Yeah,
And
when when the design development phase is complete and we have actual design drawings, so you'll be able to review the design of the entry pavilion and any other areas, but I'm not sure the timeline for
We would like to do that in the next couple of months.
Another question, now we have the new building code effective. How is that going to affect, because the seismic factors may be more conservative?
We have to meet the new building code. And we have had preliminary meetings with the building department already to discuss what we're planning on doing and how we're planning on doing it. And so that those discussions are well underway.
Now, can you refresh me on the funding again, 7.4?
Correct.
And how are we achieving that?
Turn that
I'm
over
curious.
to, there's
Yeah, that's capital improvement project
Okay.
funding.
And I'm sorry to bring you back again, but back to the handicap access? Now, I noticed that you're providing new parking and another small ramp to come up from, where the new entry is on the side.
Yes.
But you also providing a ramp to the main courtyard. That's just
So
ease. That's not really a required.
Well, there's a few attitudes towards it. One is that once you're inside the building, even if you enter the building this way, we want everyone to be able to use all aspects of the outdoors.
But you can't get to the mansion or the library.
You can get to the front of the mansion, so through here, through a ramp, and down to the front of the mansion, whether that's for photo ops or enjoying the lawn or whatever the goal would be.
Just again, a curiosity. What have you considered an elevator since you're doing all this?
Oh yes, we spent a lot of time exploring an elevator, and there were several reasons that we moved away from it. We didn't feel like it really solved all of the problems, and we thought it might create a couple of additional safety concerns because it's a fairly steep rise. The elevator you either need a long bridge to, the elevator either has to be located away from the building and then bridged over to the terrace, which has certain
And that's complicated.
preservation and architectural implications that we felt were inappropriate. Well, we spent a fair amount of time trying to find a good way to put an elevator engaged in that upper plaza, and it creates some very large retaining walls to access the lower level of that elevator, and it created some security concerns, whether they were real or just a perception of concern that people would be uncomfortable walking in that area because it would be very cavernous. And we did spend a great deal of time on it. We just couldn't come up with something that we thought was the appropriate answer or that really solved any more problems.
But the
So we moved away
building
from it.
department does not require it anyway.
And we've reviewed this with the building department, and they were satisfied with our approach to accessibility.
That's all I have for now. Thank you very much. I want to open the public hearing portion. I think I have a speaker, Sally McCallum. Welcome back. She holds the other key of Glendale.
Well, my name is Sally McCallum, and I own this marvelous house called Artaban. and which was built at the same time as the brand castle, which I'll persist in calling it that, and by the same workman and designed by Nathaniel Dryden. But aside from that, I've discovered that I'm one of the older people in this city, and it kills me. But anyway, when I was a child, my Uncle Dan, who knew the Brands, obviously, and the property very, very well, my Uncle Dan would take me on these glorious walks to Brand Park, Brand Castle, and I went into that building on several occasions, and this must have been as early as, it could have been 1941, 1942, up to about 1945. The thing that I remember that was so glorious, and I can see it in my mind to this day, I'm very puzzled about, because it's the solarium, or what I called an atrium. Anyway, it had a beautiful, in the middle of it, not the chairs and all that stuff, it wasn't a round fountain, it was a long, narrow, rectangular pond that was elevated about 2 feet above the floor, and the water came up to about the top. It had plants growing in it, and the walls were all mosaic, predominantly blue colors with some yellow. I can see blue, ultramarine, cobalt blue, white, and some yellow and whatnot in this mosaic that remains in my head because it was glorious. And I think some of it spread out around so you could walk on it, but it had a pattern and went around the base of this long rectangular water pond, and it was within that atrium, which was glassed, and there were plants growing out of it, and I know it was there. So I'm not sure when the picture was taken.
Sally, stay on the record.
You have to
Sally.
kind of
Want you on the
face
record.
us.
Oh, sorry.
So it's okay.
I'm not sure when the picture was taken, when you that you showed, but somewhere in there, I'm sure that I know that pond existed. So perhaps there's something to look for, and I remember the mosaics. So I'm just very, very curious about that. And if there are any pictures, and maybe if I have any pictures, because I haven't been through half the pictures that I've got. My uncle was big on photography. But anyway, thank you, and I'm so happy that this place is being restored and cared for, because it's really a wonderful place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll close the public portion. We'll start our discussion. Anybody wants to start? So we can make a decision on it?
Well, I think what they're doing is wonderful. Having worked at the Glendale Public Library from 1969 until 1974, and spending some time at what was the brand new renovation in 1969, it's nice that they're going to connect the two pieces together. I find it fascinating, and I think when you walk up the stairs and you end up at that wall, and you've got to basically walk around the front to get into the front of the brand mansion itself, I think this works so much better. To use a cliche, Glendale is the jewel city, but this is really the jewel of all of Glendale. I find it fascinating. I encourage you so much to do as much restoration as you can, because it is a beautiful building. And as far as the solarium, along with Sally, I think it would be nice to open it up to the way it was. I think it's the LA County Museum of Natural History, which was the original art museum. They opened their rotunda many years ago, and it just brought life to this 1906 building. And I think doing that with the actual panels of glass would just, not that it's not going to be alive now, but it would be dancing on its own feet. So. But I encourage everything. It looks very good. I have some small questions, having worked for the library, about how you put the stacks and how far they are from the actual reading room. But other than that, I think this will be an incredible asset to the city of Glendale, and I compliment everybody that has worked on it completely. It's just gorgeous.
Thank you. Sure, Desiree?
Yeah, from what I can see today, I'm excited to see it after design development's completed, but I have nothing but blessing about the direction that they're headed in. So I would support it.
Thank you. Commissioner Vidor?
Yeah, I agree with my fellow commissioners. I think this is a wonderful project. I was absolutely delighted to read. I have to confess there were some technical things on the mechanical side that I did not get into detail on, but I did read a lot of the report because every time I turned the page, I was just delighted and surprised to see how much effort was being put into this. And so it's great. And I really love the fact, as grand as that front entrance is, that it is going to be, its use is going to be minimized, and that there's going to be something interesting done to bring the whole thing together because, you know, as somebody who loves the library and does volunteer work there, I feel as though that back space, especially the gallery, which is the premier gallery in Glendale, and, you know, it has even regional status, just doesn't get the attention it deserves, and that by moving the entrance plaza and making a plaza out of it, that will refocus people on the Brand Library as a cultural center as well as a library. So I look forward to seeing more details on the project and getting into the specifics. But and I also, as Mrs. McCallum was here and she owns the other Dryden property, it should be noted for the record that that property is well deservedly on the National Register, and I sincerely hope that when this project culminates, that it ends with us nominating the property to the National Register. So onward, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Commissioner Vidor. Commissioner Tefani?
Just again, thank you, and I think it's going to look wonderful, and I look forward to seeing the design of the entry pavilion. I think it is going to be a challenge or interesting to put the older building and the new building together, and how that middle pavilion is going to be incorporated. So I look forward to seeing that design, and I'm sure you're going to do a great job on that. So thank you, and it looks like the proposal is going in the right direction.
Thank you. I concur with my colleagues. I think they've said it all. I think this is a project that has been needed for a long, long time. It's finally here. And I do agree that the bench ideas are excellent. The opening up of that courtyard it creates an invitation to the building, and removing the landscaping opens up that other side of the mansion. Removing the trees, I think it's a great idea. I think later on we'll discuss that on another agenda item, how landscaping blocks these jewels that we have. And I'm in full support of that. I just hope you can make that time. But next time around, I would like to see the seismic retrofit detail on the mansion, how you're going to do the diaphragm, because we don't want to, see a plate or anything like that. Other than that, I'm full support of it, and if you have no questions, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the direction of the Brand Library renovation.
Second, please.
I'll second.
Okay, roll call.
Commissioner Morgan,
Enthusiastically, yes.
Commissioner Shire,
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor,
Yes, and onward.
Commissioner Tefani,
Yes.
and Chairperson
Yes.
Mardian.
Thank you. Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you.
Very nice.
We still got a long ways to go, but, we'll get there.
Be back.
Do you need to take a break, anyone, or should we move on to the central one, then we'll take a break? Can we hang on for another item?
Sure.
I think, okay. Okay, bye-bye. I'm going to go back to agenda item number 6A, old business. 403 South Central Avenue, continued consideration of the Glendale Register nomination and Mills Act application. First heard on February 28, 2011.
This is the rehearing because when the commission looked at this property last month, there was general interest in seeing this as worthy of the Glendale Register. This is also a Mills Act application, and the commission came up with a list of conditions and considerations that it would like to place on any Mills Act contract. Unfortunately, the applicants weren't able to be here for that hearing, so we held it over to this month. In the meantime, I've prepared a sample motion, which at the bottom of the first page has all of the conditions that the commission first was asking for. If the commission would like, I could read those back into the records for your discussion.
Yes, please. Please do so.
Let's look at a picture of the building. First would be the removal of paint from all of the steel casement or steel sash windows on the building on all facades. On the side facade, you see up here on the left, there's some vinyl signage. The commission felt it would be more appropriate to remove the vinyl signs and install more appropriate signage. It wasn't discussed exactly what that would mean, but it could be painted signage applied directly to the wall or some other appropriate sign. At the side of the building, which you can see here, this two-story part is an addition that was made. There's a joint between the two buildings. It's now sealed with some pretty nasty-looking foam. The commission asked to see a steel, some sort of metal kind of cover plate go over that seam to kind of smooth out the appearance of that area. Over this doorway on the north facade, there's an AC unit above the door that has some kind of grill work in front of it. The commission asked that that be screened from view more effectively than it is right now. The two light fixtures that flank the entry arch on the Central Avenue facade, the commission felt weren't appropriate to the design and asked the applicants to install new fixtures there that would be reviewed for their appropriateness. On the south facade, I'm not sure, I don't remember if I have a photo of this. Here we go. On the south facade, two window openings had previously been infilled with concrete block. The commission was okay with the infill, but just asked that it be painted as part of the project so it wasn't standing out this way. And then in terms of the front facade treatment, the commission asked that the applicants consider calling out these four kind of incised arches, the two with the windows and then the two on the extreme ends, possibly in a different paint tone or color to kind of give a little more architectural definition to the front facade. So those were 6 conditions and 1 consideration for the paint. Reuben Robin is the owner, one of the owners of the property, and he's here to answer any questions or to discuss your conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. But before you speak, any questions from my colleagues? No? No. Okay. Go ahead,
Well,
Mr.
good
Robin.
afternoon, and thank you for taking the time. And I do want to apologize about last month. That was completely my fault, miscommunication on my part, not even my partner's. But we're here now, and I hope we can come to some sort of agreement in regards to the building.
Have you gone through all these conditions, and how do you feel?
Gone through the conditions. We're prepared to work with the commission on the conditions. We just asked that we could take some time on certain ones, such as, I have some notes here, the removal of the paint on those windows. I guess we decided no vinyl signs. We understand that. Would they be paint-ons, or is there something else the commission would want as opposed to vinyl?
As far as the signage is concerned?
Signage, yes. If it would be a paint-on, that's something we would need some time on because we looked into cost there, and that could be something that's very expensive. And I guess that was really it. Those two items were ones we would like a little time on because they would be a little more expensive than the rest of the improvements.
How do you feel about the consideration on painting those arches? Because I think the building will be enhanced if you do that.
It definitely would be, and that's no problem.
Because we have it under consideration, but we'll discuss it. Can we make that as a condition?
Jay?
I don't know.
And generally, the commission hasn't, paint color is not regulated typically on any of our designated properties, so I'd hesitate to go in that direction.
Okay.
But through the Mills Act, we have a little more leeway, and if the applicant says that he's willing to do that when he paints the rest of the building, I think either way, I just wouldn't want it to be seen as the commission's conditioning paint on other properties.
I appreciate that.
I mean,
don't like the
this is a
condition,
pride of-
but I thought we'll enhance the building.
Yeah, it's a pride of ownership property at this point. This piece for us, I mean, we've fallen in love with it, and I think that would definitely enhance the building itself.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Any questions to the applicant?
Yeah. We also, this isn't any kind of a condition, I'm just curious, we talked about, there was one picture, and I don't know if it's in your collection, of, when it had this big neon thing on it.
It had the big signage
Yeah.
up top.
And I think, yes, and we were also going to see if that signage still existed somewhere, because there's some thought that maybe the Museum of Neon Art, which collects signs, had salvaged it, but also, I think in that picture, there was signage on the building.
There was
which
signage on
might
the-
be, I don't know, but it might be an interesting thing to replicate if it's possible to do that, to the style of the signage. But really? Okay.
For the roof side.
I think it was, for the roof sign,
We don't
yeah,
have
very
that,
expensive.
right?
I think it would be amazing.
Yeah.
To,
I mean, not the neon thing. I mean, that would be really awesome.
That'd
but,
be amazing,
the way the signage was done at the time was very artistic, and it certainly evokes the era of the building.
Foundation of it's still up there.
You need to come out and speak if you let. That's okay.
He's got stage fright. He knows more about the building than I do. Honestly.
Okay.
He's done all the research, but it's definitely a jewel for the city. I think that in terms of the skyline, it's been here since the early 20s, and why not preserve it?
We appreciate you bringing it forward, by the way.
Thank you.
We have only like a handful of these buildings in town.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm just curious to see, you said you might need some more time for the signage and for scraping off the windows. How long a time were you thinking of?
I mean, 2 years, just because we would like to say, in terms of the windows, although it's just removing paint, we had 2 or 3 of them removed. It takes a lot of time, and a lot of them break, and they're very expensive windows. So in order to just build up the capital to pay for that, it would just take some time.
It seems just in terms of phasing the work, since they're going to have to do scaffold drops to take the paint off the windows, that would be the time they could do the paint and possibly also the signage up high on the side facade.
Okay, if I may interject. And the conditions are considered to be requirements of the Mills Act?
Yes.
So the Mills Act, typically we have some time frame in which this work is expected to be performed.
Yeah, we
So
have a
that's up to the
completion date
commission
built into
and
the
the
contract
applicant.
on all of our Mills Act
Discuss that.
properties.
Right, I didn't even know that.
Commissioner Shaw, you had a question?
Oh, that was my question.
Okay.
Your time frame.
Mr. Morgan?
As long as they're, excuse me, as long as everything else on the condition that they're interested in completing it within a 2-year period, I'm okay with
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, we'll close the public portion of it. Anybody wants to start discussion or make a motion to approve it with the conditions?
Okay. I will make a motion to,
Excuse me, Commissioner
you.
Vidor, you need to...
excellent.
And now that you have these, we should use them.
That's right, let's not,
You need to do this and this and
this one and this one
then this one.
and this one. Okay.
That's your motion up there.
That's my, okay.
I don't know that you need to read the boilerplate at the top,
No.
but if you do
Okay.
indicate which criteria it meets and then the conditions.
Okay. So I move that we recommend to move this forward as a 403 South Central Avenue as a historic resource and recommend adding the property to the Glendale Register of Historic Resources and also authorize the city manager to enter into a Mills Act contract for the property. And the proposed resource exemplifies one of the best remaining architectural types in its neighborhood, and also an outstanding or exemplary elements of attention to architectural design, detail, material, and craftsmanship of the particular historic period. It's also we also agree that it is the proposed resource is in a unique location or contains a singular feature characteristically representing an established and familiar visual feature of its neighborhood. So those are the criteria.
Thank you.
And then
Did I get that right?
Conditions with the...
And that the conditions as stated in the document that you summarized will be conditioned as part of the Mills Act with completion in a 2-year time frame?
Generally, we run these things through the end of the calendar year, just the way we've done it. So we could either do this December 31st, 2014, or we could do it from today's date in 2013, I'm sorry.
I would say December would be appropriate.
Okay, so December 31st, 2013.
Jay, if I may ask, would that correspond with when they would actually enter into the Mills contract, that December date?
Yeah, the Mills Act contract, the Mills contract is usually signed in December of each year, so that's
so
actually, yeah.
Yeah, that would seem to be appropriate.
Okay.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Tefankian?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
And Chairperson Mardian?
Yes. Thank you for bringing it again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we take a few minutes break because we have quite a few agenda items to discuss, or do you want to move on?
We can move on.
I can move on.
Okay, let's move on. Okay. Oh, you seconded this one. Okay. Okay. All right, we'll go back to old business 6B, consideration of commission-generated proposals for future discussion regarding HPC policies and goals. Does anyone have anything to add to our list?
No. To add to the
Or anything you want to bring up? Or you want, we'll discuss the other ones later, but...
Okay. Yes, I have a comment. I'm sorry. I have a comment on the citywide survey issue. That's one of the items that we were proposing to discuss, and I think it's important that we get to that and address that because there seem to be issues coming up on a regular basis with the status of buildings and EIRs being done, and I think there would be a lot more stability with development now moving forward at a little faster pace, as it will be if we talk about the survey and maybe come up with, if the money isn't there for a full formal survey about how we're going to address the survey question, with possibly, making a list of properties that everybody concedes are important and then surveying those properties instead of the whole city. But we have to do something, and I think that we should make this a high priority.
We could, if the commission approves, we could agendize that for the next meeting. So it's already been seconded, so it's ready.
It's already been seconded,
for being put on the agenda. So.
And I think it's wise, maybe you should bring it up sooner as Commissioner Vidor, because this was sponsored 7/26, so it's time.
Yeah,
I think.
it's an old one.
Then anybody wants to second that?
I second it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we need to take a roll call on this?
No.
No? Okay.
It had already been seconded, so
Right. All right.
we just put it on the agenda now.
Thank you very much.
Speaking of that, if I can add something, I recently received some information about solar installations in historic districts from some of the nationwide advocacy groups. I thought giving that to you today could give you some background information, since we were planning to talk about that in the future. Whether you agendize that for April or sometime after, it's up to you, but this might be a good time to think about it.
Thank you.
I happened to see this when I was there. I saw a few things about it at Detroit, at the National Alliance, yeah.
Grand Rapids, yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything before we move on to other agenda item? Any consideration or again? No. Thank you. We'll move on to 7C. Commission discussion impact landscaping or new construction on designated historic resource.
Now, this was an issue raised by Chair Mardian, and the chair can let me know. I've spoken with the city attorney about some of these so we can get some background on where we can go, what we can and can't do. So I could present that first, or you could have your discussion first, and then I could give the city attorney's view. Probably.
Go ahead and do it, because maybe we don't have to, if we get in.
Yeah, well, no, I think there's still plenty of room for your discussion. In general, our existing designated properties, like other properties in Glendale, we don't regulate landscaping. And we now have drought-tolerant requirements, so all landscaping has to be drought-tolerant and meet the Be Water Wise standards. But previous to that, we didn't. Our our procedure for historic properties is to identify significant landscape features in designation reports where they exist. And if those features are identified, then those become part of the purview of the commission, so that it's an identified tree or grouping of trees or hedge or anything that we know has some historic meaning to the property's landscape. One thought that we have that I ran by the city attorney is that we do have a little more leeway with Mills Act properties, where if you were considering a property that did have a hedge in front of it that you thought either at the time of designation or you thought sometime in the future might grow to a height that it would obscure the property, under the Mills Act we have much more flexibility in terms of what we can ask the property owners to regulate, and then it's their decision whether that's something that keeps them from entering into the contract or if they go ahead and sign. That would only affect, though, obviously properties moving forward. We'd have more limited ability to do anything about existing properties that aren't visible. Part of the question that the city attorney had also is, we do have some properties that themselves aren't visible from the street. Even though we say it's a public benefit to have, preserved buildings designated on the Glendale Register, which we all know it is, sometimes there's less of an immediate public benefit to something that you can't see. And I think that's what's generating this question, whether it's through landscaping or even new construction next to a property. In terms of new construction, generally, we don't regulate new construction in terms of visual impacts to historic properties, but we can regulate it in terms of possible construction impacts or other kind of ancillary impacts.
Okay.
And that applies mainly to commercial properties, obviously. We're not going to have as much of an issue in single-family neighborhoods where we have required setbacks at the sides and the front and the rear, so for new construction.
Thank you, Mr. J. I guess since I was the sponsor of this item, I just want to say a few things, and I think you have some pictures
Yeah, we have
to show.
some photos.
The whole purpose of this discussion that I wanted to have, it pertains to properties that to be designated. Obviously, we can't control the ones that are designated because that's the way they are. And I understand the city's goals or rules that we don't have any requirements. But I believe that landscaping is an intricate part of preservation also. Now, the properties that we are designating are the city's historical architectural jewels, and we need to showcase them, and we shouldn't obstruct them totally, especially when the streetscape doesn't have that. And some of these examples that I'll be showing are done in the last few years, I believe, and it really interrupts the pattern of the streetscape in the neighborhood. This discussion should also, like Mr. Platt said, it should include some of the infill projects that we're going to see in the future. As you recall, a few months ago we reviewed one new infill project in a historical district that you couldn't see the structure, and we decided to keep that hedges there because it was historically there. And that's why the reason that I have brought this up. Now, this is a designated property. This is well-maintained home, and I think the landscaping in this case is pleasant. It doesn't detract anything. And if you can go to the next slide, Mr. J, this is another designated property. It's called the Zigzag House. The other one was a Sailor House. This hedge has been maybe 5-6 years now, maybe a little longer. Now we've got a double hedge going on. Now, although you see the structure, second floor, but if you go, I think there's another picture, Mr. J.
I don't know if I put all of them in.
Okay.
Just put
That's
one
okay.
for each.
Because this is the corner lot and it wraps around. Now, I don't know how we can approach these things. I'm trying to get your point of view on it. I don't want to create, red tapes or new rules and regulation, but I don't think this is acceptable, in my opinion. Go to the other one.
And then this property is on the Glendale Register. It's called the Blumenthal House officially.
It is. Yeah, it is.
And it's not this one or the...
This, we can discuss this one.
No Mills Act on the Blumenthal
This
House.
one, this doesn't have it, right?
This is not designated.
This is not designated, but maybe in the future it will come to us. And this is the only visible portion of the house. And actually, this portion is a new addition, if I recall correctly.
I think the metal roofed part is the original, and the kind of
Yeah.
concrete walls are the addition.
And if we could go to the other one. Now, this one again, you can't even see the house, although it's not designated. Go back to the other one. This one has been going on for the last few years. Yeah, I mean, totally. Because we are going to see districts that we are, not necessarily designated homes, but do we want to preserve our streetscape? That's the question that I really want to raise. And I think that was it, right?
Yeah, that's it.
That's it, yeah. So I want to hear what my colleagues have to say about this issue and how we can approach it.
That's the question. How do you approach it?
Hey, Jay, could you expand a little bit on us having more leeway if it's a Mills Act property? Could we then say that because it's a historic property and has that, sense that high level, that it must be visible to the street, and then in those cases we could, somewhat scrutinize on the landscaping, or if a hedge grew up, or shrubbery or trees that completely block the structure, then in those evaluations every 2 to 5 years we could address that?
Yeah, I think we'd have to do it on a case-by-case basis. For example, this house, modernist houses, this is by Harwell Hamilton Harris, sometimes houses like this have a landscape buffer designed into them. I don't know if that's the case here, but that's why we wouldn't want to have a blanket statement. But we could write it into the language of the contract, into the body of the contract with the city attorney's approval. This is the time to have that discussion, because we still are waiting until after the election to bring our Mills Act discussion to council with all of the other items we discussed last year. So this is something we could add if the commission was interested. But I certainly don't see any reason why we couldn't say that the view from the public way should be maintained at a high level, certain level.
Yeah, because I would definitely support that. I think it's challenging if, when we have really no, kind of domain over them, if it's not a historic district, or even if it is, there you'd have contributing properties, non-contributing, and if we really don't have any authority over landscaping from the city regulations, it's going to be hard for us to do it without a Mills Act.
Yeah, and that leaves us with the historic districts, which Chair Mardian mentioned. We wouldn't have any kind of power in districts the way the ordinance is written right now. In districts, though, we can identify contributing structures having hardscape and landscape features that are significant. And that's what it's pretty rare that we've had any landscape features, but we have had hardscape, walkways, and retaining walls and things like that identified in the reports.
Oh, across the whole district?
Yeah. So I don't think there's any way we could write into we'd have to change the district ordinance if we were going to regulate landscaping significantly. And I don't think in our neighborhoods around Glendale we see this as a widespread problem. But we certainly don't want to lose properties that are on the Mills Act, which we're treating at the highest level of preservation.
Right.
Yeah, if I may elaborate on the issue of historic districts separate from designated properties with Mills Act contracts. I think one of the objectives of the historic district ordinance was that the underlying zoning and standards would remain the same as they are outside of historic districts. What you have is the overlay of historic district guidelines and a historic district report that begins to identify contributors versus non-contributors. And since we don't have this kind of regulation regarding hedges and landscapes outside of historic districts, I think Jay is correct that you would have to begin to change the ordinance and to a certain extent some of the intent of the public process that generated the ordinance to sort of say, now we're going to say in historic districts you're not allowed to have a hedge that might obscure your property. So it would be, that's kind of the context of historic districts. Now Mills Act properties may be a different kind of discussion.
Thank you for that. So I do agree with Alan. I don't think we should get into the district. Our ordinance is fairly new, and we should just, I think, concentrate on the designated properties, and we just want to find a legal way of doing it and not discourage people from coming forward also. So it's not that, it's, in some cases they do, when the street is all, has no hedges, no landscaping that block it, I think there's an issue there. It just becomes more singled out when the hedges are there. But I'll leave it at that and see what my other colleagues will say. I have a card. Do you mind if I open up the public portion of it so I can hear the speaker? Yes. Thank you. Because I think she has a home, Ms. McCallum, you have a home that has sort of obscured.
Yes, it has a forest. And
but it's a beautiful home.
It's part of its ambiance.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that since my great uncle and family and all of that had a lot to do with developing, for example, Northwest Glendale. Part of the deal when they developed that was that the streets were going to be landscaped, lushly landscaped with houses set back well from the street. And that lush landscaping in certain respects has grown into a forest like it is at my house with 200-foot trees. But it would, I think it has to be, it must be on an individual basis. I mean, a grand modernist home, that's something else. But like my house is in a setting, and I would die before the red-tailed hawk's nests were taken out because of the trees or the owls that lived there and all of that. And the fact that it's very private and it's very beautiful. And if you would all like to come and see my forest, you are all invited. And we'll have a drink on the front porch, and you'll see how wonderful it is.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll close the public portion. Anybody else wants to have a discussion or a question or comment or any support or?
I'll make a comment. I understand your where you're coming from, and I agree. I mean, I see better landscaping than I used to, but a lot of landscaping where it just, it might be a nice house, but you just cringe. And, I don't know what the answer to that is without getting into too much minutia or being too specific. I suppose during the Mills Act process we could make recommendations, but I think more to your point, which is a very important issue, maybe there needs to be more education, because even though the city has drought-tolerant and native plant and indigenous plant requirements now, I just don't honestly see that happening in Glendale. I mean, when I come to the Civic Center, the demonstration garden or central garden in the Plaza is not representative of what the city is trying to promote, and I just don't see.
You didn't see our AstroTurf garden?
Yeah, I did see that. I was including that in my, frustration index, but also the types of plantings as well as the plastic grass. That just doesn't sound like the approach that we're hoping people would take. So maybe there needs to be some education of some sort of what heritage gardening is and how one develops landscaping against certain architectural features, so that before we would foist requirements on anybody or policy changes, we get a little bit better civic buy-in to the whole idea of landscape design. But how that type of education would happen, I'm not sure. Maybe the Historical Society would do something. I'll nominate them to have a to have a presentation. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Commissioner Tafagin, any comments on the idea?
Well, I see both sides of the coin. I just think, how would we mandate that? How would we write that into policy and control the landscaping? That's
the dilemma
that would just be.
Yeah.
I think the Mills Act is the perfect vehicle for that, because it gives us, we can go beyond anything that's in the ordinance, because it's an agreement between the owner and the city. And like I said, if they don't want to do what the commission is asking, they don't have to enter the contract and get the tax savings. So it really makes it the fairest process. The thing it does, though, is that pretty much everything that we have now is grandfathered. So the Blumenthal House, we're not going to be able to ask them to change their hedge.
Right, I understand that.
But we can at least move forward with a new policy.
No, I understand where you're coming from, but can we put a number, height on this thing?
Oh, I'd be super reluctant to do that, because we have hillside settings, we have flatland settings, we have different size
are
properties.
Are we saying that should we do it on case-by-case basis then?
I think, because when you see a property come to you, you're going to recognize if there's an issue with an existing piece of landscaping, and then we could have a blanket statement saying that no future landscaping installed on this property shall be allowed to grow to a point where it obscures, visibility of the property. Alan?
If I may, actually, the Brand Library is a pretty good indication of, if you were to see that come forward, you might say, as part of the Mills Act, these 3 trees in the way of the prominent vista should be removed. I could also see it going the other way, where if you were to get one of these modernist homes that had a 10-foot high hedge surrounding a kind of landscape that was sort of, in a sense, part of the architecture features of the building, that you may say the hedge should be maintained to a certain height, or
exactly.
And
you think of the Schindler House in West Hollywood, that is meant to not be seen from the street.
So I think, you'd want to have some flexibility to sort of respond to different kinds of historic conditions of the architecture.
Okay. Mr. Morgan?
Well, I concur with Commissioner Vidor and the rest of my commissioners and Jay as far as it has to be on a case-by-case basis, and it has to be when it comes up for the Mills Act, we can determine at that time whether we think it should have a hedge of a certain height or trees or whatever needs to be done, and we'll just do it at that point. To make any blanket statement is just, I think, inappropriate for us in the commission that we're at this time. Though I do agree that we nominate all of these jewels and then they're hidden behind a big hedge. It's kind of a little ridiculous, but at the same time we're nominating the house itself, not the hedge. So sometimes jewels, you just can't see them. Unfortunately, it's the way it goes. But I think it should be on a case-by-case basis. So.
Okay. Well, at least that's a start. At least we can start somewhere with it.
Yeah.
Anything else, Commissioner Shah? No? Okay, so how do we...
One more thing.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd like to put the city of Glendale in general on the spot and say a good place to start, and the Brand Library is an excellent one, is that all of the civic buildings and buildings, whether they're libraries or this type of building, should be exemplary and should dictate to people what we as a city expect them to do. So it would be nice if the city of Glendale's own landscaping reflected the goals of the city.
And the Brand Library, I think this
Brand
would be a good
Library is
test
the
case
first
to
one,
open that
yeah.
discussion.
Before we close this item, there was a discussion on fences, hedges a while back. Is that anything relates to this?
It's a discussion about citywide policy
Citywide,
that's been back and forth for a number of years. It's an incredibly complicated issue. We don't need to be involved in it because we're dealing with our specific districts, and we have our setbacks. We have design review. If someone wanted to build a fence outside of the setback, we would be looking at it as a design review issue where we could say it's appropriate or not. So we have a little more control on commission level than we have citywide.
Okay.
But I don't think we want to open that up.
No, we don't want to open. I was just curious. Because they discussed hedges too, because it becomes like fences and things like that. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the general consensus is to do it on case-by-case basis? Okay.
In the Mills Act.
In the Mills Act?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Do we need a vote on this or a roll call or anything?
Yes, since we're talking about revising Mills Act policy, we'll put this in the list of things that we'll bring to City Council, just to show the thoughtful approach we have to the Mills Act.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Tefankian?
Yes.
And Chairperson Mardian?
Yes. Okay, we'll move on to next agenda item. Commission, I guess 7D, Commission discussion policy regarding naming of Glendale Register properties.
And you have two handouts regarding this item. One is a letter to the Commission from the Glendale Historical Society with several recommendations that I could read into the record if you'd like.
Please.
These are all in reference to how we are naming properties listed on the Glendale Register. I believe these are in something of an order of priority. When possible, a property's historic name, quote-unquote, that's for houses like Artevine and other houses that have actual names that were associated with them, should be used. In the absence of such a name, the designation of the property should reflect the name of a prominent or historically significant owner or occupant, the Wyan House, the Lewis House. That matches our current policy of naming properties when there's a criterion C level significance person associated with the house or the building. When no such prominent or historically significant owner-occupant can be identified, the designated name should consist of the name of the original owner, preferably the one who commissioned the architect to design and build the property. The second part of that is the process we have now, when we know that the owner was involved with the design of the property at some significant level. So we have the Block House as an example and the Rice House as an example from recent designations. We don't, at this point, and it's my recommendation that we not start naming every property after whoever the first owner happened to be. My professional view is that dilutes the importance of naming properties, where some people buy a house that was speculatively built and they happen to be the first person who bought it, but they weren't involved in decision-making that led to its creation. It makes it less... to me, it diminishes the significance of the names of the people who really were associated with the properties. But some cities do that. It's a fairly common practice to go back to the original owner. It started back in New England, where you had owners building houses in 1710, possibly, and so they had a different level of significance locally. If the Historical Society goes on to say, if a prominent or original owner can be identified, then I think they mean cannot. If no prominent owner, yeah, then the name may consist of a builder or developer, event, or association from which the property derives. Events and associations are things that we have listed properties for. They mentioned the Oak of Peace and the McCall's House, which was the house built for the magazine competition. I'd be very, very hesitant for the Commission to start naming properties after builders, because builders build hundreds, if not thousands, of properties, and how do you decide where that starts and ends? Finally, the Historical Society suggests that a property should not be named after the current owner or occupant unless HPC determines the property is strongly associated with that individual, which would be the case of the Block House, where Richard Block still lives on the property he worked on the design of. And I guess in the past, and this brings me to the second handout, in 2006, the Commission did discuss the naming of properties, because in 2005 there was a house that was named after a current owner rather than a historic owner or historic name, and I guess that raised some discussion among the Commission. So the Commission made a motion in 2006 that the Commission direct staff to provide the most appropriate historic name to a resource based on the historic significance of one or more of the original and earliest owners or an important feature or use, and that plaques must bear a historical name. That deviates a bit from our current practice of using addresses when we don't have a specific name to use, but that's the recommendation that I've given the Commission previously, is use the address in the absence of a significant name, and that's consistent with what several other cities do around the country.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. And I'll go to the sponsor of this item, Commissioner Vidor, I believe. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think that the Historical Society kind of hit the general tone of the policy as I would like to see it, where there's like an algorithm, and you start with the most relevant way of naming and then go down a list. And whether we need to be so specific, you mentioned we don't want to call out builders because builders build lots of houses. We could modify it, but that in general, this is kind of the idea, and I think the 2006 minutes reflect part of this, so maybe something could be put together, but we're not addressing your original concern, which was that you were going in the direction of addressing. So, I guess I have to ask you, Mr. Platt, how you feel about taking this approach when we've been focused more on just listing addresses. I like the idea of naming because I think it helps tell the story of the city in a little more evocative way than just having a house be known by its address. And then I found another document somewhere on the internet that was from some architectural society in some other state where they're saying, please don't get into too many details, the more the merrier. List a whole bunch of names, like you can list the types of names that people commonly call the house, and you can give it an official name. I think that's going a little too far, but that we should be a little more creative with our naming.
Yeah, and back east you have a lot of hyphenated names where you'll have an original builder and then 100 years later, someone significant lived in the house, so you might combine those two names, and that's pretty common. I don't think we have a lot of that situation here.
But we could later.
Yeah, the naming of, we have houses like Cedar Knoll, which is an informal name that had been in place for decades. One thing that comes to mind is the house on Mountain, what everyone in the neighborhood called the Castle House, which we did not designate as the Castle House because that was kind of more anecdotal, but that's the kind of situation where if the commission said, we really think that name has been in use for a long time, let's call it the Castle House. One of the most exciting things when we have applicants come in is pretty much everyone says, oh, someone significant lived in this property that meets criterion C, and we'll often, through my review and through your review, kind of say, very interesting piece of history, but that person may not have risen to the level that we expect for the Glendale Register criteria. When we have someone like the Wellman House, where Wellman was the vice president of Glendale Federal Bank, and we didn't know anything about him before, and we really asked the applicants to dig and to find some interesting information, and they found enough pretty significant information that he really rose to the level of significance where we thought, the Wellman House is appropriate. What that means is if we name other houses after people that we don't know anything about, except that Fred and Ida Morgenstern came to Glendale from Idaho in such and such a year, and they bought this property, and we don't know anything else about them, which is pretty common for a lot of our nominated properties, it makes the Morgensterns and the Wellman name kind of equivalent, and then it goes back to this kind of, it's a sense of more picturesque. I live in the Morgenstern house rather than, I can see owners wanting that. But in terms of historic meaning, to me, it kind of just diminishes things a bit. I know naming things after the address is not the most satisfactory. It's kind of a default, I think, once we go through, like you said, the list of the hierarchy of naming. But if the commission wants to name based on, first owners or some other kind of method, we do your bidding. So it's not staff's decision. So.
Well, and
Thank you.
Okay.
So, go ahead. Sure.
My question relates to what we decide here today. Will City Council uphold that? Because we had a recent situation where the commission decided clearly not to identify the house with a name because there was not a significant person that lived there, and the name they were presenting was the current owner. And so we clearly determined here that we didn't want it to be the current owner's name. And then it goes to City Council, and they allow that. How do we handle that going forward, or will that always have the potential to happen?
Box of tissues. I don't think we have, I don't picture that happening very often, but I don't think we can, informally, everyone can refer to the house however they please, but I don't think we can really go over City Council's head on something like naming.
But they would be then advised of what our general guidelines are, or our rules.
In the future we could make it a stronger case. I believe the staff report did. The Jensen name is very significant in Glendale, and the Jensen House is a very appropriate name for that property. It became more of a political decision than a historically appropriate decision, and that may happen again. And at that point, I think the house could have a designated name and then an informal name.
And if I may, Jay, if I recall, that staff report was carried to the council regarding the Jensen House, which then was designated as the Casa de Carmen.
Casa de Carmen.
That the commission's opinion and discussion on the name of the house was communicated to the city council, and I think at a staff level, it's sort of the best we can sort of offer you is that we will communicate your recommendation, your discussion to the council, and in the end, the council has the final decision on these matters.
Well, we could also, in our staff reports, explain the Commission's naming policy, so that's more explicit in the City Council staff report.
Yeah, that might be helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Shar. Commissioner Tefangen, any thoughts on the idea?
I just had a question about hyphenating names, and I think you mentioned, Commissioner Vidor, you mentioned that maybe later on a property there might be a significant owner at some point. Do we change names, or do we then add on names? Is that
That's interesting. We haven't, that I know of, changed names, although the Sailor House may have gone through a name change. I'm not sure about that. But the possibilities there, if significant information in 50 years, when none of us are here, and someone significant lives in the house today, the commission of tomorrow may decide to amend the name or change it. And I think hyphenated names are completely appropriate. And some of the properties that we have with names, like the Wellman House is an example, the Wellmans weren't the first family in the house, so they came later, and the house acquired its significance through the Wellman connection later on. So we're very open to kind of different ways of naming that.
Thank you. Commissioner Morgan?
Well, I think the Glendale Historical Society has kind of set up the standard that I would like to see. Basically, you start off with the most important, and then you work your way down through the different ways to get to, if you can't really truly name it for somebody or a place or an event, then you would end up with 1441 or whatever the number is on the property itself. I agree with Commissioner Vidor that it kind of leaves you cold when you just look at a number, and it doesn't give you any history of the house itself. And we are the Historic Preservation Commission, so it would be helpful if when we name the house, or if we name the house, we named it for some significant thing in the city. I mean, when you look at the list, and we've got 87 of them, most of them have a name per se. You know, there are a few that just have the street address, but I think you get a better feeling for the house by just the name that's on it rather than just the address. But I can see there are places where the house is significant and there's no one significant that ever lived there. And what else can you do but list their number? So, but I would.
I'm sorry.
I would just encourage naming the house for something significant that gives a little more history to it than just a number.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner Morgan. Go ahead, Mr. Play.
I was going to say this is another situation of case by case, where as you review the nomination that's submitted and question, for example, another interesting house is 1446 Royal, where one of the co-owners of Kiev Radio lived there. And we didn't feel there was enough information in the nomination to really say that this owner had risen to a level of significance, but it was something that was interesting. That's a situation where an owner might do more research after designation and come back to us and say, here's what I found, what do you think? Or, like Commissioner Morgan, that might be enough for the commission to decide, well, that name is interesting and there's something there, even if they're not designated, if the house isn't designated under criterion C necessarily. So I think that kind of case-by-case aspect is good, but I think having a policy where if the commission could just establish the hierarchy of where you want us to go, that would be good to have that in writing so that we could have that for future commissions and future staff so we know what our policy has been.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you found this. This was this one.
Yeah, that was a really random find.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of funny.
Because we had a discussion and we asked staff to kind of have a little workshop and brought, I think Cindy Tomac brought someone here. We talked about the naming, how a naming should be placed on a property, or even though if there was no architect but as long as to my recollection, if somebody lived in that house for 20 years and he contributed to the development or was intricate part of the city, and he deserved to be named, his house to be named. And I'll leave it at that, but if you want to work down, I don't see an address. I mean, it doesn't say anything. I agree with Commissioner Vidor and Morgan and my other colleagues that, address doesn't tell the picture. But the name should be associated with it. But we should work, I think that's a good idea, work ourselves down and see which one was more relevant, so we can name them after that, or the building after that. Because we have a lot of homes built in the 20s that were not associated with architects or famous designers, or it was just merely architecture, and that's going to be hard to say. And like I said, if we're going to have to put an address to it, we'll let it be.
Correct.
And then just to confirm, in general practice is that we wouldn't name a property after its architect or its builder, because those people do so many buildings that to say one's specifically associated. And again, there could be a very strange case where we did that. The Rice House would be an interesting example where we know that's Gerald Lomax's only house in Glendale, and that perhaps could have been a hyphenated name. But that would be pretty rare to have that. So.
Even I think the Derby House, Frank Lloyd Wright, we don't call it Frank or Lloyd's House.
Lloyd Wright.
Yeah, we don't call it Lloyd's House, but we call it the Derby House. As I put it. Okay, go ahead.
So, Jay, are you recommending that on bullet point 4, on the Glendale Historic Society's letter, we strike that and then say it would really bump to address rather than builder or developer?
No, because, well, I think on bullet point 4, events and associations like Oak of Peace and McCall's House have some meaning, but I would cross out builder and developer.
Okay.
Developer.
Not
Got it.
strike the whole
You could have
thing.
event or association.
So what do we do? Which ones are we going with?
One,
If
two,
I'll run
three.
down the list and see if the commission is okay with that, where if there's a historic name, as there is for Sally's house, we would use the historic
Yes.
name.
That's the
That's
first.
good.
Number one.
Right.
If there's a person of criterion C level significance associated with the house, that would automatically be the name of the house.
Yes.
For bullet point 2. When there isn't such a person, how does this work? We would go to the original owner's name unless we felt that we knew so little. I guess the next ones would all be kind of together in order of importance depending on the situation. So we would possibly go with the original owner's house, which is the case of the Rodriguez and the Derby house, where there's also the belief that those people were involved in the design of the house. They actually commissioned the house for the family. If there are events or associations or any other aspect besides architect or developer, we would name the house after those things. So that would be McCall's House, Oak of Peace, possibly the Castle House would fall into that category where it's a commonly used name. And then the last one is looking at the current, not naming after the current owner, but naming after a person who's significant in the history of the house. So we already identified that in the third bullet point, so that's kind of a repeat. What the Historical Society's letter doesn't have is if at the end of this list we come to a point where we really don't think that we have a name that works for the commission, then we would go with the address.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. I think that's very good. And I also like, I can't remember if you said you wanted to call out the proviso that in general property should not be named after the current owner, because I think this keeps coming up over and over again, and most recently
Yes.
in a very unappealing way, and I think we need to be very specific about that. Now, is this going to be written into the ordinance on
We
landmarking?
do have to have the caveat for Richard Block.
Right,
Anyone.
no, that I think having examples are good, too. That, and I'm not, and I think to state it in a way that if it's appropriate, and citing the Block case as a case where it is appropriate, that's allowable, but otherwise, no. So that it would be very clear when you should not name the house after the current owner or a person living in the house.
So you're saying, in other words, case-by-case basis on this particular last one? No?
No.
Not case-by-case basis, then?
Case by case, because a situation like the Block House, we already have a bullet point identifying the original owner as being significant because of their work with the architect or
Falls
the
into
designer.
another category.
That original
Falls
owner
into
just
number
happens
3.
to still own the house in that case. So.
Right.
But in general, we wouldn't name anything after a current owner if that's the only association.
To the city of Glendale.
But if he was an important person, significant person, part of Glendale, what do you do?
Then we name them if they meet criterion C, or the commission thinks even if they don't meet criterion C, they have a level of historic interest that you're interested in memorializing.
Their involvement with
then we would do that.
design or...
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
So if you vote to kind of follow what I just said, what I'll do is I'll put it in writing for the
Okay.
next hearing, and if there are
Okay.
any problems, we can amend it.
Okay.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Mardian?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Bedore?
Yes,
Commissioner Tufrankian?
Yes.
And Chairperson Mardian.
sure what we're voting on.
Okay, well, let's move on to the other item.
Ex parte.
I
S1?
think we're-
This one's easy.
This one is easy, yeah.
This one's quick and easy.
Yeah, well, let's hope so.
I think so. So I spoke with the
This is item D. I think that I was sponsored this ex parte communication between commissioners and applicants. All, go ahead, Mr. J, and start with your...
Okay, so fancy language of ex parte means a commissioner speaking to an applicant outside of the channel of being in this room in a public hearing environment. So I spoke with the city attorney's office, and they say you have free speech rights as much as anyone does, and you may speak with applicants about a project that may even be coming before the commission. If a commissioner speaks about relevant business that's coming to the commission with an applicant or another individual who's involved in the process in some way, it is highly, strongly encouraged by the city attorney's office that you disclose that communication at the beginning of the hearing. It doesn't mean you need to recuse yourself. It means that you need to just say that I have spoken with Mr. So-and-so about this project, and he said this. And then you just get it out at the beginning. The idea is that we keep everything as transparent as possible. But this isn't a Brown Act issue. It's two citizens in Glendale talking to each other about a project. The idea is that you as commissioners need to use your best judgment, the city attorney says, and be very careful if and when this happens. But if it does and you feel it's appropriate, then you just have to disclose it at the hearing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stay. That's exactly what I was getting at. The reason I brought this up is just this is to further reinforce our review process and create transparency, like Mr. Platt noted, and create no bias.
The one place that would change is if there's a business transaction, either pending or a recent transaction between a commissioner and an applicant, then you would probably have to recuse yourself. So, and again, we can take all of those to the city attorney's office when it comes up, and you should use staff, just let us know when you think there might be a question, and we can vet it before we're here. Make sure we're okay.
Thank you, Mr. Platt. And that's all. I think Mr. Platt said it all, and prior to the agenda item being reviewed, the commissioner should disclose any communication with the applicant prior to starting the discussion on the item. And I'll leave it at that. I don't want to elaborate further, but I think he mentioned it all. And if anybody wants to discuss it more, have questions or support or no support, then we'll move on. Mr. Morgan?
I think it's fine.
You're fine with disclosing
Yes,
the information?
exactly.
Okay. Commissioner Shire?
Yeah, it's appropriate.
Thank you.
Yes.
Dora?
Yes.
Again? That was very short, Mr. Great. Thank you.
Right to the point.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Tefankian?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
And Chairperson Mardian?
Yes. Okay.
While we're still on that agenda item, I will agendize the citywide survey discussion for next month's hearing. Is there anything else you would like to see agendized for next month? So far, the calendar is fairly light. We have one register nomination that will be coming forward, and Brockmont will be bringing the petition back, and that's all I know of right now.
Thank you. Well, any comments from Commissioner? Or
the consideration of evening HPC meetings, we saw what we got
Oh, right, yeah, there was another note.
January, and I would like to consider having the meetings in the evening. We're going to be having quite a few historic districts coming up, and that will give the chance for a lot of people who are in those districts to actually attend the meetings that can't attend them during the day. We have 3 historic districts, so I would encourage everybody that can appear here. So
And don't get your hopes up that we'll have a turnout like we did in January. But
I can only hope.
It was one of a kind.
Yes. Well, we don't know. And, if you have
We're growing.
we could, with 3 historic districts, there could be quite a few people that actually show up at night that can't be here during the day.
Okay.
And we encourage people to be part of, coming to the commission itself. And I would encourage as many people as possible to attend. And if we can make it easier for them to attend, I would like to do so.
So are you wanting to agendize that for next
I
month?
think that's coming.
yeah, we can do it. It was already seconded, so as long as there's, I guess our policy is as long as there's space on the calendar, we could take as many of these items. Today,
Yes.
I may have put 1 too many, 2 too many, I don't know, but we're still within our normal.
But I think this item, the evening item, it's a matter of having a slot.
Good one.
Schedule.
Yeah,
Schedule.
what I'll do is I'll research what's available, what the possibilities are, and just come back to you with a report about that.
I do agree, Mr. Morgan. I think he said it. It brings more awareness to our preservation issues, and also allows people to come and say their piece on the historical district. And this is another outreach, I believe, different way of outreach, because we don't have that much outreach on preservation yet. But with that, anybody else? Any other comments?
I totally agree. We should agendize it.
Okay, we should agendize it. Thank you. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'd like to say one thing, though.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On Tuesday, April 5th, Glendale votes, and I just encourage everybody to vote on April 5th. We'd like to get the largest turnout in the city of Glendale's history if possible, and just know your candidates and vote for them, and that's about it. Just please vote.
Thank you. I was going to say that, but I wasn't sure if that was appropriate, but you beat me.
It happened so quickly.
Thank you. Well, take a motion to adjourn.
We adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. Right.
That's it.
Thank you.